The wind carried dust across the open plains, whispering through the sagebrush and the wooden fences of the small town of Red Valley. The sun, heavy and gold, sank slow behind the hills, painting the horizon in fire and sorrow. Somewhere along that quiet road, a wagon rolled in from the east. Its wheels groaned, its driver weary, and beside him sat a young woman, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her name was Eliza Hahn, and she was a seamstress, one who had traveled farther than she ever meant to. The people of Red Valley watched her arrival with curious eyes. Outsiders were rare, and women who came alone were rarer still. Her face was pale from the long journey, her eyes dark with the kind of sadness that doesn't speak, only lingers. When the wagon stopped near the general store, she stepped down, holding nothing but a worn carpetbag and a wooden box that contained her sewing tools. The driver tipped his hat. "Good luck, miss. You've got a long life ahead if the West doesn't break you first." She nodded faintly. "Thank you." The wagon rattled away, leaving her standing in the dust. For a long moment, she simply looked around, the small town, the saloon doors swinging lazily, the sound of a blacksmith's hammer echoing faintly in the distance. Red Valley was rough, wild, and unforgiving. But for Eliza, it was her chance to begin again. She rented a small space near the mercantile and hung a hand-painted sign that read, "Eliza Hahn, Stitching and Mending." It was modest, but the letters were steady and sure, just like her hands. Work came slowly at first. The local women eyed her from afar, whispering that she was too quiet, too fine, or too foreign. But her stitching was perfect, her prices fair, and before long, men brought in their torn jackets and ranch hands brought in ripped gloves and trousers. It was a week later when Caleb Turner first walked through her door. He was a young rancher, tall and broad-shouldered, with a gentle way about him despite the roughness of his work. His hat was dusty, his boots worn, and his shirt, well, that was what brought him in. "Ma'am," he said, holding out a sleeve torn clean down the seam, "I heard you were the one who could fix just about anything." Eliza smiled faintly. "I fix what I can." He nodded, watching her hands move, delicate, quick, confident. She didn't speak much, and neither did he, but there was something in the silence that felt peaceful. "Don't suppose you're from around here," he said finally. "No," she replied softly. "I came from Boston." "That's a long way from Red Valley." She looked up, her dark eyes meeting his. "Far enough to forget some things." He said nothing more. Just paid her, tipped his hat, and left. But he came back, once, twice, then often. Sometimes with torn shirts, sometimes just to talk. The people started whispering, as small towns do. "That Turner boy's spending too much time at the seamstress's shop," they'd say. But Caleb didn't care. Something about Eliza drew him in, not her beauty, though she had that quiet, graceful kind, but the sadness behind her smile. One late afternoon, the wind howled hard across the plains, rattling the windows of her shop. Caleb stepped in, holding a jar of wild honey. "Thought you might like this," he said. She smiled, setting her needle down. "You didn't have to." "I know. But I wanted to." They sat for a while in silence, the golden light spilling across the room. Then, without looking up, she said softly, "It hurts, you know." Caleb frowned. "What does?" "This place," she whispered. "Not the town. Not the work. Just, carrying something heavy for so long." He said nothing. Her voice trembled as she continued, "Back east, I had a husband. A good man, I thought. He was a tailor, like me. But the day after our shop burned, he left. Didn't even look back." Caleb's heart tightened. "I'm sorry. I came here because I didn't want to be seen as broken," she said, eyes glistening. "But the truth is, sometimes it still hurts to breathe." He reached across the table, hesitated, then gently placed his hand over hers. The West doesn't ask where you came from, Eliza. Only where you're going next. She smiled faintly. And where are you going, Mr. Turner? Wherever the wind decides, he said. But I wouldn't mind if it kept blowing me your way. Her laughter, soft and light, filled the room like the first note of a forgotten song. Days turned into weeks. Eliza's shop flourished. She sewed wedding dresses for the local girls and patched work clothes for ranch hands. She began to hum as she worked, something she hadn't done since before the fire back east. And Caleb, he was there more often than not. He'd help carry supplies, fix the shutters, or sit quietly on the porch while she worked. Then came winter. The cold rolled down from the mountains, fierce and unrelenting. One evening, a snowstorm swept across Red Valley, fierce enough to close the saloon early and silence even the rowdiest voices. Caleb fought through the snow to her shop, knocking hard on the door. Eliza. You inside? She opened it slowly, her face pale. Caleb, you shouldn't be out in this weather. Neither should you, he said. Come stay at the ranch tonight. You'll freeze here. She shook her head. I can't. Yes, you can. I won't have you alone in this storm. Something in his voice, firm, warm, made her nod. She packed a few things, and he led her through the snow-covered road, his arm steadying her as the wind whipped around them. At the ranch, the fire burned bright. She sat wrapped in a quilt while Caleb poured coffee. The warmth, the crackle of flames, the scent of wood smoke, it all felt like a dream. She looked at him and whispered, "Thank you." He smiled. You'd have done the same. But that night, as the wind howled and the snow piled high, she woke suddenly with pain in her chest. A deep, stabbing ache that made her gasp. She pressed a hand to her heart, trembling. It hurts, she whispered. Caleb stirred and rushed to her side. Eliza, what is it? She tried to speak, but her voice broke. It's my chest. I can't. He held her hand, fear flickering in his eyes. Stay with me. Please. The town doctor came at dawn, his face grave. She's worn herself thin. The cold made it worse. She needs rest, weeks of it. Caleb nodded, refusing to leave her side. He cooked, cleaned, tended the ranch, and sat by her every night. When she finally woke stronger, she found him asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hat tilted forward. You stayed, she murmured. He lifted his head and smiled softly. Course I did. You think I'd let the snow take you? Tears welled in her eyes. You're too kind, Caleb. Kindness ain't the word, he said. Maybe I just care more than I should. She reached for his hand. Then don't stop. As winter faded into spring, Eliza regained her strength. Together, they planted a small garden behind the ranch. She stitched curtains for his windows, he built her a new sewing table. The house began to feel alive again, filled with laughter, warmth, and something deeper neither dared to name. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to gold, Caleb stood beside her on the porch. Eliza, he said quietly, you ever think about staying? Not just in town, but here. With me. She looked at him, her heart trembling. I came here to forget what love felt like. He nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you remember. She smiled, tears glinting in her eyes. You make it sound easy. It ain't, he said. But nothing worth holdin' ever is. That night, as the stars stretched endless above the plains, she whispered, Caleb? Yeah. It doesn't hurt so much anymore. He turned to her, eyes soft. Then maybe that's love. Time passed gently. The town's whispers faded into acceptance. The seamstress from the east became the rancher's heart, and the ranch became her home. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd sit by the window, stitching while he played an old harmonica tune his father once taught him. And in those moments, the world felt whole again. Years later, folks still spoke of her, the quiet woman with steady hands and a heart like silk. They said she stitched not just clothes, but broken spirits too. And every time the wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of wild sage and cottonwood, some swore they could still hear her whisper, soft, tender, eternal. "It hurts," she'd once said. But out there, in the vastness of the West, pain had turned into peace. Because love, in all its fragile beauty, had stitched together two souls that once thought they were beyond repair. And the echoes of their story lived on. In every thread, every dawn, and every quiet breeze that touched the land they called home. This is Frontier Echoes, where every whisper of the West carries a story worth remembering.